In this video, I want to look at a storytelling technique that involves the subversion of expectations. On a small scale, we use it to beguile the reader through their story, and on a grander scale, we use it at the end to construct our ending in such a way that it avoids the greatest pitfall of all, namely being predictable. And I've been inspired by the life and works of a great ornithologist called Robert Stroud, perhaps more well known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. Stroud's whole life was a living testament to the idea of subverting expectations. Now, I'll be honest, I struggled a little bit to find some connection between the dreaming spires of Oxford and the Birdman of Alcatraz. So I thought I'd take the bus here to Iffley Loch and commune with the ducks. Which is what I did, but the audio quality wasn't very good, so I'm afraid we'll just have to go to Iffley Loch in spirit rather than me narrate there. So welcome to another in my series on how to write your novel using that most unlikely of writing implements, a round Oxford bus ticket. So what do I mean by the subversion of expectations? Well, it has to do with the way we present information. We do it in such a way that there is a little twist, just a little frisson of pleasure for the reader. For example, when I started talking about the world-famous ornithologist and it turned out I was talking about the Birdman of Alcatraz, were you surprised? Did you smile? It's like giving the reader little metaphorical donuts. Now, most people will have heard of Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. He was arrested in 1909 for murder, and then he spent the next 53 years in prison, mostly in solitary confinement. And then at some point he found an injured sparrow in the exercise yard and took it to his cell to care for. And then he got hold of some more, and before you knew it, he had 300 birds in homemade cages in his cell, and he became an expert on avian pathology. And then in 1963, they made a movie of his life starring Burt Lancaster. Stroud's life was full of these little donuts. At the age of 13, we find him in a brawl in a bar where he was attacked by a man 3 times his age, and he fought back and overcame his assailant, and it turned out it was his father. At 18, we find him falling in love with a 36-year-old prostitute called Edna O'Brien, and he becomes her pimp. And then when one of her customers refuses to pay for her services, Stroud goes round to see him and ends up killing him. And what happens next? Donut time. He turns himself in to the police. So they send him to Leavenworth Penitentiary, and there we might never have heard of him again but for the arrival of a reforming governor called William Biddle. And he did something on arrival that was so shocking that even the hardened felons were appalled. He forced the prison cook to eat his own stew. But he also allowed prisoners access to correspondence courses, and Stroud began to educate himself. And then, alas, he ended up in a fight with a prison guard and murdered him, and ended up on death row, and for weeks his sleep was disturbed by the banging outside as they built his gallows. Eventually the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. If we were making a novel about Stroud, and then we would use these donuts to draw the reader through the tale. But for the ending we need something a bit grander, a bit more surprising, because the worst sin you can commit in an ending is to be predictable. And you can see the problem with Stroud's life. I mean, this isn't an escape story, so there are only really 2 obvious ways it can pan out. Either he is released or he dies in prison. And the reader will guess both of those. What we need is an ending that the reader will never guess, but when it is revealed will strike them as very appropriate, and they'll think, of course, that's exactly how it should be. Well, I tell you, it's not easy doing that. It's very, very difficult, but it's essential. So what do we do with Stroud? Well, I think we look for the explanation or for the ending in his own biography, because the one thing that strikes us about him is he was an enigma, wasn't he? Well, I mean, who was this man? Why did he turn himself into the cops when he killed that man? Why did he care for those birds but show no remorse for the men he slew? And once when he received a letter from a boy complaining in despair about his own life, why did he send a really truly heartfelt reply? I want to illustrate the technique using an episode from my own life, something which I've come to regard as the mother of all donuts. It happened in the 1990s when I was travelling in Cambodia, and the country was still deeply wounded by the aftermath of the insane Khmer Rouge years, and the Foreign Office advice was, don't go near the place. But I was young and invincible, so I went and stayed in Phnom Penh, and about the only tourist site there was the Tuol Sleng school, where the Khmer Rouge imprisoned and murdered tens of thousands of innocent Cambodians. And on the next to the entrance there was this list of regulations. Number 6 says, while getting lashes or electrification you must not cry at all. Number 3, don't be a fool, for you are a chap who dare to thwart the revolution. Well, you get the picture. So on my first night I wanted to go out for a beer, but the owner of the hotel tried to stop me. He told me it was too dangerous. But as I said, I was young and invincible, so I walked downtown and found a bar, and the evening passed without incident. But then time came to leave, and I found a trishaw driver outside and gave him the name of my hotel, and we cycled off into the night. But I started to get the impression that he was going in the wrong direction. And the further and further he went, the more I became sure of it. And then he turned off the main road, and suddenly everything was plunged into darkness because there were no streetlights. And he cycled on, and my alarm grew. And I began to realise, this could be it. Am I going to be robbed? I mean, are they going to kill me? Does he perhaps think I'm a chap who dares to thwart the revolution? Well, eventually we pulled up outside a compound, and there were men in the darkness, and there was an orange flickering glow, and I could make out that they seemed to be dismantling engine parts and smelting them. And the driver called out, and they came up to me, and at the front was their leader, who was the biggest man I'd ever seen in my life. He was like a 7-foot goblin, and he held in his hand a spanner the size of a canoe. And he leaned forward and said to me, well, I'll tell you what he said after this short commercial break. Have you ever wondered why lovers carve their initials into the bark of trees? How else can they express it, this overwhelming, bewildering ecstasy of being? How else can they cheat death and defy the fingernails of sluttish time? Oh, we were here, they cry, we existed and we loved. Well, that sounds great, doesn't it? But what if nobody loves you? What if there was no one to carve your name into a tree? Well, then you have to cheat death in a different way. Write a novel. Download Gateway to Narnia, my free email course on how to write your first novel. The link is in the description below. Before I tell you about what happened to me, I want to finish the novel off about Stroud and find a way of ending it that is unexpected, but also feels fitting. Because when the movie came out, thousands of people petitioned the president asking him to release Stroud, causing one of the guards at Alcatraz to remark that Stroud was a complete jerk and the people really wanted the president to pardon Burt Lancaster. Either way, I'm going to arrange it that the president convenes a committee to decide upon the fate of Stroud. And at a dramatic moment, a man walks into the room and says that Stroud once saved his life. Well, even Robert Stroud couldn't remember doing that. Who was this man? Well, he explains. Remember the boy who wrote Stroud a letter? It's him. And he explains to the committee how that letter changed the course of his life. It ended his juvenile delinquency, and he went on to study and became a lawyer. And then he read out the letter. Dear Dennis, no man is or ever can be defeated until he himself quits fighting. I spent my entire adult life in prison, and 47 years of that time locked in a cell, alone. Most people look upon my life as very sad, but no one has ever seen me give up to sadness. I have spent a lot of time locked up, but I have never wasted that time. I have never served time, as that term is usually understood, because I have made that time serve me, and I have never been able to find enough of it to do all the things I wanted to do. And at the end, Stroud did something that no one had ever seen him do before. He wept. Now for the mother of all donuts. There I was in the Phnom Penh night, and the man with the spanner bigger than a canoe leant forward, and I uttered up a silent prayer to the God I'd spent my life ignoring, and the man said, Excuse me, sir, would you be kind enough to tell me the name of your hotel? The driver did not understand you when you communicated it to him previously.
They call him the Birdman, and he is the most defiant man alive.